Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Ray Paparotti from Life Point Church International in White Plains, New York. I'm glad you're joining me on this Saturday, April 25th, as we start this new small mini-series for the next 5 days on the stages of renewal. The stages of renewal. I had been thinking through this whole process over the past few weeks of what direction we ought to be walking in. It seems like in our day today that the local authorities and those in charge have been coming up with plans on how to deal with the problems that we are facing and how that will unfold over the next few weeks. And it seems that we ought to have a message of hope and of direction. Tonight I'd like to give you some direction towards the aspect of renewal. What is renewal? Renewal, if I can use it in this sense, is a revival of sorts. It's a change of demeanor, a change of attitude, a change of direction, a change of course from one way into a complete radical new way. My friends, we are completely prime for a renewal in our current condition in this world. I believe that we are at a crossroads now, that we could either give in to fear and anxiety, give in to the pressures of the day, give in to the uncertainties of the day, and be completely lost. If we go in that direction, we will be confused. We will be like sheep going through the slaughter. We won't understand what's happening in our society. But if we give ourselves to the points of renewal, then we will find a life that is actually happy. And my friends, I know tonight that you want to be happy. I want to be happy. I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to live in anxiety. I want to live in happiness, in joy. I want to live in purpose, and we're going to see that over the next few nights. This message that I want to bring to you, each night I'll bring a different stage of renewal, and we will take this all from the book of John chapter 21. So I'll give you a moment as we're getting ready to go there. I want you to turn to John 21. I want you to begin reading it over the next few days, and you're going to see an awesome direction of how we grow and how we can come out of the situation that we are in and give ourselves towards renewal. Now, in every generation, there are building blocks of renewal available. In every generation, there's always a heartache. In every generation, there is a difficulty in society, a difficulty in culture. But with those difficulties comes the building blocks of renewal, where we can see an incredible change. Those of you that are believers in Jesus Christ, I'm speaking directly towards you and your walk with God as you begin to see that God has a renewal. Let me give you a better word. God has a revival waiting to take place in and through your life, and it will be amazing. If we look at John 21, there is quite a bit of scripture there. There are about 20 verses I would like to read. I'm going to kind of give you a condensed understanding of what's happening here. The time of the day is a difficult one. The disciples are living in an era where there are problems. Rome is ruling the current day, the biblical time, and the Israelites are under a suppression, a sort of bondage. And not only that, Jesus had come, Jesus had died, and he was buried. And in that process, the disciples started to have fear. They were uncertain about their future. They were uncertain about their tomorrow. They didn't know what was happening in life. And so Peter, we're going to be focusing on him and his interactions with Jesus. Peter, in verse 2 of John 21, he summons some of the other disciples and he says, "We're done. Let's go fishing. I don't want to do this anymore. They've been following Jesus for 3 years. They have been through ups and downs. Now Jesus had died. He had resurrected, but they hadn't seen him yet. And Peter feels low. Remember, Peter was one of the biggest, one of the disciples who abandoned Jesus in such a grave way. Yes, Judas turned him over, but Peter denied Jesus to his face in front of the high court, which later condemned Jesus to death on a cross. So Peter is living under this guilt. Not only is society bad, not only is culture struggling, but isn't that just like our life? Many of you have seen the coronavirus is spreading in such a drastic way, but on top of that, you're compounded with your own fears, your own problems, your own issues in your life. And so Peter decides that he's not going to do it anymore. He wants to take a break from life, and he says to the other disciples, let's go fishing. So they go out fishing in verse 3. They go out, and they said they got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. Verse 4, but now as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they answered from the boat, they said no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So they cast their net, and when they were not able to haul it in, because of the great number of fish. Therefore, the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. So Peter heard it was him. He put on his outer garment, for he was ready from work, and he threw himself into the sea. Now, we're going to take that one portion tonight and just focus on that one piece and see the first stage of renewal. Peter was tired. Peter was frustrated. Peter was annoyed. He was struggling in his walk. He was struggling in his life. Everything was churning. And he went out on his own with the disciples to get away from the crunch of life, to go fishing, and caught nothing. Jesus appears on the beach, and he instructs the disciples to cast their net on the other side of the boat. They did so, and they caught such a big number of fish that they could not contain it. Something happened in Peter at that moment. There was a moving in him. There was a stirring. Something broke in him, and we're going to look at that. I'll give this to you systematically. So tonight, the first stage of renewal is found in this one word, and it is this: the word returning. Returning. What does that mean, returning? How did Peter have to return? Well, Jesus does something amazing. By producing this miracle for Peter and the other disciples, Jesus was taking Peter back to the event of his calling. Maybe you can recollect that with me together. If you will turn with me just for a moment to Luke chapter 5, I want to show you something here. Luke chapter 5, the first 11 verses. To sum it up, Jesus was preaching on the shore, and he saw Peter cleaning out his nets because he had caught nothing. So Jesus gets onto his boat and starts teaching the people from Peter's boat. Then Jesus turns and instructs Peter and says, go out into the deep water. He goes out with him, and Jesus turns and says to Peter, I want you to cast your net on the side of the boat for a catch. And Peter says to Jesus, you're insane, if I can paraphrase it. You're crazy. He says, I'm a fisherman, you're not. We've been fishing all night, and yet we have caught nothing. But they follow Christ. He says, but at your command I'll do it. And he casts his net on the side of the boat, and he catches such a great catch of fish that he can't even contain it. Very much similar to the passage we just read in John 21. After he caught those fish in the first encounter, it says that Peter saw that he fell at Jesus' feet, and he said, go away from me because I am a sinful man. Jesus turns to Peter and says, don't fear. From now on, you'll be catching men. Jesus at that moment gives him a choice and changes his way of life. Changes his direction, changes his purpose. And Peter, it says here in verse 11, when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and they followed him. Now, there was excitement in following Jesus. There was this excitement to go after him, but you know what happens so many times in life? Generations start to change, problems start to arise, difficulties come, and we look and we get compounded down with all the fears and anxieties of this world and all the pressures of things that build on our lives. And we find when all of those pressures are there, God is still the same, and he desires our life to be changed, desires us to be renewed. That renewal comes through a returning. What does that mean? Jesus took Peter back to the event of his calling, which means he wanted to remind Peter, to bring him back to return to the place when I first called you. Return to the place when I first gave you the direction for your life. And let me tell you tonight, amidst of all the pandemic, all the fear, all the problems, all the craziness of this world, if you and I will return ourselves to go back and know this is what God called me to do, you start the process of renewal in your life. You start the process of change. You start the process of God reviving you, bringing you to life. We must return to the primary aspect of our calling. And let me tell you, the aspect of our calling, the aspect of God's calling over your life is not yourself. The calling is about him and about serving and finding those who are lost, becoming, as Jesus said to Peter, fishers of men. Going after those who are struggling, going after people and building them up, growing them, raising them, winning them over. We must go back to the primary aspect of our calling. That is to be what? As Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5 and 6, to be the salt of the earth, to be the light, the city on a hill shining its light. We have to stop wasting our time with nonsensical messages. We need to stop wasting our time heckling people for money and for supplies. We need to start seeing the lost of this world as the primary purpose and the end goal. And this will birth in us renewal. If we look at this pandemic, my friends, get rid of the fear of it. Get rid of the anxiety of it. If we look at this pandemic and say, God, you are preparing us today so that we can win this world, everything will start to shift and change in your life. We ought to give ourselves to that. Give ourselves to that cause. As of 6 hours ago, the BBC News recorded that since this pandemic started, we have lost, due to the pandemic, as they say, about 200,000 people in this world have died. I want to give you this understanding. True renewal will always begin with a returning to what matters most. We ought to put our priorities back in order. Where are you today? Your priorities need to change. Our priorities need to change. We need to look at the world and say, oh God, as this world is going and walking through its hardship, we need to be used by him so that we can bring change into this world. So I said 200,000 people have passed away, died because of this coronavirus. Every generation, every decade sees its hardships. Every century has gone through difficulties. I want to give you a story from the early 19th century, which I won't ask if any of you remember it, because probably not one listener here was alive then. If you are, well, you've really done a good job. In the early 1900s, life was not very easy. There was also hardship, difficulty, fear spreading across not only the nation, spreading across the world. In just the first few years of the 19th century, let me give you a rundown here. These are historical facts of things that have happened in the early 19th century. In just the first few years of the early 19th century, these are some of the things that happened. A powerful hurricane hits Galveston, Texas, in our own nation, the United States, killing about 8,000 people. In Guatemala, there's an earthquake killing over 2,000 people. In Martinique, There, Mount Pelée erupts, destroying the town of St. Pierre and killing 30,000 people. Mount Vesuvius erupts and devastates Naples. There's a San Francisco earthquake. It destroys much of San Francisco, killing over 3,000 people, with over 225 to 300,000 left homeless in one day. A typhoon and tsunami hit Hong Kong. Over 10,000 people died. An earthquake and tsunami destroyed Messina in Sicily and Calabria, killing over 150,000 people in one day. Talk about fear. Talk about not understanding. You're looking at the events of the world and saying, my God, people are dying everywhere. Strange things are happening, hardships are happening, and in the middle of this chaos, in the middle of everything churning, in 1904, a 16-year-old boy, William Borden, graduates from a Chicago high school. He was heir to his family's fortune. They were multi-millionaires back in the early 1900s. As heir, his parents, as a graduation from high school gift, they bought him a one-year trip around the world. In 1904, William Borden, he boards a ship and sets sail from the United States, and he makes his way throughout Asia, the Middle East, Europe. And as he starts looking at people, seeing the devastation that hits the world in every culture, he started to develop a heart that began to cry and weep, and he's uncertain about life, and he's not sure what's happening, and he starts to look to God and say, God, I have a heart for the hurting. I don't want life to be about myself and about the money that I have and all that I can accomplish at 16 years old. He comes back from his trip around the world, and he writes in his diary from that trip, he says, they have to be reached. He writes his family and he says, I want to be a missionary. I want to reach people. That first time when he decided and saw the heartache of mankind, it's noted that in his Bible he wrote two words. He wrote, no reserves. No reserves. That following year, he arrived home and he was welcomed into the Yale family. He joined Yale University in 1905 as a freshman, and quickly people started to recognize there was something different about him. You may think people noticed his money, people noticed his wealth, but that's not what they noticed in him. They said that this one individual, it's written in many papers of the day, people that wrote about William Borden, they said that the thing that was different about him is that he had such a desire to help hurting mankind. He was giving himself to that way. During college, he made an entry in his personal journal, and this is what he said. He said in his journal, say no to self and say yes to Jesus every time. He writes, his biggest disappointment in Yale came when the university president spoke in a convocation about the students' need of having a fixed purpose. Listen, he was disappointed when the president of Yale talked about having a purpose, and this is the same disappointment that we have today. Everybody in our world, everybody in our society is talking about having a purpose, is talking about what we need to do to advance in this world, to advance in this society, to break the diseases, to raise the vaccines and everything that's going on. But this is what his disappointment was in that message. While the president talked of having a fixed purpose, Borden wrote, he neglected to say what our purpose should be and where we should get the ability to preserve and the strength to resist temptation. Yes, he said, everyone is telling us there's purpose for you, but he said, what is that purpose? That purpose is not just to exist in this world. That purpose is not just to make it through this day and make it through the day without getting sick or without getting diseased. The purpose for our life is to follow Christ, to serve Him, and to seek and save the lost the same way that Jesus Christ did. He was bothered by that. During his first semester at Yale, he met with a student and he started praying with one student in the morning. That prayer meeting started to extend, and after the first day of praying, a second student came. After that, a third student came, and he started meeting with people. By the end of his first year, listen to this, 150 freshmen were meeting every week for Bible study and prayer. By the time Bill Borden was a senior at Yale, 1,000 of Yale's 1,300 students were meeting in prayer. 1,000 were meeting in prayer. During those prayer meetings, he still had the wealth of all his family backing him. School was paid off. There was no struggle in that way. He started to evaluate his life, and he said, God, there are more people to reach. And he started developing a desire to reach the Muslim Kansu people of China. Fixing his eyes on that, he never wavered. Upon his graduation from Yale, Borden turned down some of the biggest high-paying jobs that were scouting him. And it was reported that at graduation, he wrote 2 more words under the first ones in his Bible. He wrote, "No retreats." No retreats. Following his graduation at Yale, William Borden went to Princeton University in New Jersey, where he finished his studies. As soon as he finished his studies, he sailed for China. Because he was hoping to work with the Muslims, he stopped in Egypt, and he was hoping to learn Arabic while there so that when he got to these Muslim people in China, he would be able to reach them in a unique way. While he was in Cairo, he contracted spiral meningitis. Within a few days, 25-year-old William Borden died. When the news of his death came back to the United States, the story was carried by every major newspaper and outlet. A wave of sorrow went across the world. Borden, in his death, gave away all of his wealth to reach the lost in different missionary societies. He was so joyous in his sacrifice. Was his death a waste? Not in God's perspective. As the story has it, prior to his death, Borden had written 2 more words in his Bible. Underneath the words that he first wrote, "no reserves," was written the second set of words, "no retreats," and finally these third words before he died, "no regrets." What a man who lived in revival of his day, who lived in renewal in every aspect of his life. There was that joy, that happiness, that drive that moved his eyes from the situation of the world towards the hurt in the world. And because of that, he was fulfilled in every way. He lived a full life, a very full life, even at the young age, death age of 25. Why? Because he lived in renewal. My friends, you need to live in renewal. I need to live in renewal. As our life and our situation, as our country is hurting, as our world is hurting, let's return back to the things that matter the most. Return back to seeking God. Return back to saying, God, the most important thing in my life is to follow you. The most important thing in my life is to serve you, to seek you, to know you. That God would be first in my home, would be first in my family, would be first in everything that I do. If you return to the basics of love for God, you can be rest assured that revival is on your shore. Revival is waiting to grip you, to shake you. Revival is waiting to stir you so that you can be alive in Him. You can be happy and fulfilled as William Borden was in serving a God who never abandons those in this world. My friends, we have need of this tonight. I want to say to you, return to the purpose of your calling. God bless you tonight. Join me again tomorrow night as we look at the second stage in renewal. God bless you.